and you go left instead of going right, and then that shooter finds their way into the room that you just vacated, what happens then? So there's just a lot of liability. There's a lot of issues that surround it that scare me to death. And as a teacher, I already know I have my hands full. I'm already fighting an uphill battle in the whole education scene, and then trying to wrap my brain around all these other responsibility with carrying a concealed weapon. I'm sure there's teachers that are qualified who would love to do it. My first instinct is I want to protect the kids first, make sure that they are definitely away from danger before I would ever consider going after a shooter. And again, it's just a time issue.
Yeah, I think, the other thing I think about is I'm sure before you were in combat, you had trained and trained and trained and trained for that sort of situation. And there's still unknowns, there's still variables that you can't possibly imagine before they happen, and you can't know for sure how you will react until you are in the situation. Are teachers going to suddenly start going through hundreds of hours of combat training?
Right. We still have all of our, our hands are full with doing professional development, learning all the state tests, all the new requirements, all the new methods for teaching. And then you're 100% right. Tack on close quarter combat, how to, take down an active shooter, all the different craze classes. There's just not enough time. There's not enough time in the actual school year to teach everything that kids need to know for the subject that you're teaching.
Well, then I think we've effectively said that's a bad idea. I was just going to ask if there are suggestions you have as a teacher for how schools could be safer or how we could do a better job identifying people who might harm people and getting guns away from them.
I have a few ideas on things that may help. The first thing that I'm seeing is teach students first aid. And the reason why is not specifically for active shooter situations. It's just you never know when you'll walk upon an accident, or you'll never know when you'll walk upon somebody who needs medical attention, whether that's CPR, emergency first responder, first aid, just how to take care of a wound, how to apply pressure, whether it's a gunshot wound or a broken leg or a car accident. So teaching students first aid it's kind of a responsible thing to do, and there's no weapons involved, and it could be something that's life saving. Oftentimes, if there's an active shooter, it takes a long time for the injured to receive medical help prior to the building being cleared and safe for emergency personnel to come in. So if we could kind of take care of the wounded as the event's unfolding, you might be able to save some lives there. That's one thing. Another thing would be to really look at how secure your building is. Your building is only as secure as your most uninformed student is. And what do I mean by that? I mean that schools, there's funding available, and if they have the means to do so, are supposed to be in lockdown already. Meaning the only way a visitor should ever be able to find their way into the building is through the front doors by the main office. And they're usually vetted. There's usually a camera, but again, not all schools have that funding. But there should be a camera where they can see if somebody's carrying something, and they have to be buzzed in. Now, imagine how many doors there are in a large school. If a kid comes knocking on a door and there's another student in the hallway that sees somebody knocking on the door and the person outside says, "Hey, can you open the door for me?" Your unsuspecting student might just do that. And so you can put all the metal detectors, you can put all the bulletproof glass, you can put all of the safety measures in place. But if somebody opens the door, especially if the door is locked, all those safety measures are for naught. So you've got to inform your students. Don't ever open a door for anyone during school hours. It might seem rude, it might seem insensitive, but you have to share with your students that, do you really want to be the person who opened the door for a shooter to gain access to the building? So your first aid, teaching your students, then you have teaching your students not to open the door and keep the building locked, making sure you don't have any teachers that, are smokers that like to prop open doors, or occasionally some schools are set up where you have like a gym class that goes out to a stadium or a gym class that goes outside. You got to make sure that people have keys. You got to make sure that those locker rooms stay shut. You got to make sure that your building is locked at all times. It's just a safe and smart thing to do. People do that with their homes, right? They keep their homes locked at all times. We need to keep our schools locked at all times. And again, there's not there's no safety precaution that you can do that could easily be circumvented by a kid just opening a door. Other things, I don't know if other people have talked about wait time for gun sales, if they've talked about making bump stocks illegal, anything about. I mean, automatic weapons are illegal, but I don't see the point
Hmm.
in some of these weapons that are semi-automatic, especially if you're hunting deer, if you're hunting something.
Hmm.
How terrible of a shot do you have to be that you have to have a semi-automatic weapon?
Well, and somebody had mentioned that, if you do shoot deer with semi-automatic weapon, the kind of exit wound, the kind of internal damage, like if the whole point of hunting is hunting for food, it's not a very good idea to use automatic weaponry.
Yeah, your automatics are going to be illegal. Like there's no one's going to have one of those. But a semi-automatic weapon, even then, it's like, how's that a sport? I've been asked by many students, I've been asked by many colleagues, I've been asked by many people how I feel about teachers carrying guns and teachers being armed. And again, there's probably some that are very comfortable with it. But for me, my first priority isn't to go after somebody else and kill them. My first priority is to save all the people in the room first. So if there's a kid who has a gun in my classroom, then yes, definitely. There's going to be some violence, and it's going to happen pretty quickly. But there's more than one way of handling it. I don't have to have a gun and draw against somebody else. Barricade, evacuate, run, be evasive, get those kids out of there. And I tell all my students this. I say, hey, if there's ever a situation that happens, my first priority is your safety. I will make sure that every single one of you gets out alive before I would ever pursue a shooter.
Hmm.
And that's from somebody who's skilled with different types of weapons. That's from somebody who has seen violence, who has seen people murdered, who has seen people get killed, and I know how I will react. I want to save as many lives as possible. I want to do the thing that many people don't want to do. But as excited as I would get, when I mean excited, I mean the adrenaline would be searing through my body. You have to save the kids first. You can't go out. You can't just run in the hallway and expect to have somebody stand still, motionless, saying, "Hey, I'm the bad guy." It's not a reality. And bullets ricochet, bullets fly, and seeing a kid's face that you had in class, you're asking a lot for teachers.
Hmm.
To kill a student, oh my word. These are kids. If it's an adult, even then, it's like, I want to keep the kids as safe as possible first. Once I know they're safe, that's when you pursue. And 7 minutes is not a lot of time to do that.
Yeah.
Imagine being a teacher who your classroom is on the second floor. How are you going to get kids out in a timely manner? Are you going to use like a fire ladder? Well, how fast do you think you can get 30 to 35 kids down a ladder? It takes us a couple minutes to do a fire drill, and that's with everybody walking. So imagine trying to get them out one by one out of a second story window or a third or fourth story window.
Just today, my kids' school finally put in a security guard at the front. They've been locked down already, but they had, the secretaries in the office who are distracted with a million other things buzzing people in. And so they just today put in, security right at the front door that people have to go past before they go further into the building. And it's so rough to talk to kids. My kids are, in kindergarten and preschool about why there needs to be this person at the front, and with the preschooler you can just say, oh, it's just someone friendly to greet us as we come in, but kindergartners
Hmm.
know a little bit better. And just having to even think about really much more likely scenario than somebody who's coming in to do a mass shooting is someone coming to kidnap a kid or something that's far more likely statistically, but just for any reason having to think about what could happen in a school and needing that level of security is It's just really tough as parents.
Yeah, and it's one of those conversations I mean, when we were kids, we never had active shooter drills. We had fire drills. Active shooter drills wasn't a thing. It wasn't a concern. And now, as a teacher, I'll tell you that when they get on the PA at an unusual time, usually we have morning announcements and afternoon announcements, and they don't like to interrupt the school day. But when that all call PA comes on, everyone stops. It only took the one time where somebody gets on the PA and says, attention students, we are in lockdown. And seeing the look and the fear in these kids' eyes as they're running and sprinting to get inside classrooms. And then there's that moment of silence where you're trying to figure out, is this a drill? Is this a real thing? Is there something happening inside of my building right now as we speak? Or is it something that's happening, 2 blocks away, and this is just a precautionary measure that we're taking?
Hmm.
And in those moments of, I don't want to say panic, but those moments where there's an intense amount of adrenaline, there's an intense amount of fear, and that's when I have those conversations with my students. Hey, here's what we're going to do. If we hear shots fired, we're barricading the door. I will get every single one of you out of the classroom. Once everyone gets out of the classroom, if you feel like you're the type of person where you want to pursue the shooter, stay with me, and we will go find the shooter. But it's not like we're going to do it with guns. We've got baseball bats. We've got fire extinguishers. Some of our classrooms have really heavy stools that, lab stools that people sit on. There's chairs, there's desks, there's all kinds of things that you could use to throw at a person who's armed with a gun. And most people laugh when they say that, but most people would never expect somebody to come running at you when you have a weapon. A lot of these shooters are expecting people to be in the fetal position on the floor, making an easy target. When somebody's yelling and screaming at you, it's a different ball game. It's a completely different story, especially if they're throwing something at you, or if they're like yelling and screaming, or if instead of it's one person, if there's a group of people, you're going to reconsider your options if you're the active shooter. But no one wants to talk about that. No one wants to talk about the sacrifice. No one wants to talk about how, as the people in the building can take back that power and can use that fear against the active shooter. And I'll tell you what, as a grown man, if I'm running and yelling at some kid, I'd like to think that they're going to, not that I'm a scary person, but it might cause them to pause just an extra second longer. And that pause could be the difference between life and death. And I know those things might sound pretty extreme, but when it comes to combat, sometimes time can move a lot faster than it typically does. And being able to have that edge to make that quick decision, it could save one or many lives. And you see those decisions being made by veterans all the time. You hear all the Medal of Honor winners that have done some extraordinary things in a short amount of time, and they've been able to fend off different enemy positions with something as simple as an e-tool, which is like an entrenching tool. It's like a foldable shovel. So while we're inside of a building, if there's no guns, there's no reason to think that you're defenseless. I always point out the fire extinguisher. You ever blast somebody in the face with a fire extinguisher?
No, I haven't.
I'll, I'll tell you what, the fire extinguisher and most, again, I can't speak for every school, but generally speaking, there's going to be a fire extinguisher nearby. You pull the pin and you depress the handle, and depending on what kind of fire extinguisher it is, you might be filling the room up with really cold carbon dioxide. You might be filling it with this white, powdery, almost like blinding gas. All kinds of things. You could hit somebody with it and take somebody out. A lot of people think schools are gun-free zones, so they're defenseless, and that's simply not true. But most of you teachers, they love their students. They love their kids, even though, some will put boogers on the wall, and some are, the kids that are always acting up and are always feisty. In those moments where it could be life or death, that teacher is going to protect those kids every way that they can, and it doesn't have to be with a gun.
Well, I think that's a really useful perspective for people to think about. And I think
Hmm.
it's something that people, you bring a unique perspective to this being